Temujin was born on the frozen banks of the Onan River, entering the world not with a cry, but with a silence that unnerved the clan. The wind howled outside the felt tent, tearing at the heavy wool with invisible claws. But inside, the future Khan lay still in his mother's arms, observing the world with dark, unblinking eyes. When the midwife pried open his tiny fist, she gasped and stepped back in superstitious fear. There, clutched tight in his palm, was a clot of blood the size of a knucklebone, dark and glistening in the firelight. It was a sign from the eternal blue sky, a dark warning that this child would one day grasp the world as tightly as he held that blood. He was not born to peace. He was born to the sword, and the steppe itself seemed to hold its breath at his arrival, knowing that the world would never be the same again. His father, Yesugai, looked down at the boy with pride and a deep, gnawing unease that he could not name. He named him Temujin, after a Tatar chieftain he had captured, binding the boy's fate to conflict and war from his very first day on the earth. As the boy grew, Yesugai took him out to the high ridges where the golden eagles nested, far above the concerns of men. He showed Temujin the endless sea of grass, stretching out until it met the horizon in a blur of blue and green. Trust no one but your shadow, Yasugai told him, his voice carried away by the relentless wind. The lesson was harsh, but necessary. On the steppe, weakness was death, and trust was a luxury that a wolf could not afford. Temujin watched the eagles circle, his eyes narrowing against the glare, learning the patience of a predator waiting for its moment. When Temujin was 9, the time came to find him a bride. The journey to the Olkhunut tribe was long, winding through valleys where the snow still clung to the shadows of the rocks like bleached bones. Yasugai rode tall in the saddle, broad and confident, but Temujin rode silently, his eyes scanning the horizon for threats that only he could feel. They arrived at the camp of Taisetsen, a wise leader who saw the fire burning in the young boy's eyes. There, Temujin met Porte. She was a year older, with a face like the full moon and eyes that held a quiet strength. They did not speak much, but a bond was formed in the silence, a promise that would outlast the wars to come. Yasuke left his son there to serve his future in-laws, unaware it was the last time they would ever meet in this life. The parting was brief, stripped of sentimentality, as was the way of their people. Yasugai placed a heavy hand on Temujin's shoulder, a gesture that carried more weight than words. "Serve them well," he said, looming over the boy against the glare of the sun. Temujin nodded, watching his father mount his horse with the ease of a lifetime rider. As Yasugai turned to ride back to their clan, he looked back once. It was a lingering glance, a premonition perhaps, of the darkness gathering on the horizon. Temujin stood alone in the strange camp, a guest and a servant, watching until his father was nothing more than a speck of dust against the vast, indifferent blue sky. He felt a sudden chill settle in his bones that had nothing to do with the biting wind, a coldness that whispered of endings. On his return journey, Yasugai grew thirsty. He spotted a camp of Tatars feasting on the open plain. By the laws of the steppe, hospitality was sacred, so he rode in to share their meal, hiding his identity behind a weary smile. The Tatars recognized him, the man who had slain their chieftains, but they smiled and offered him fermented mare's milk. Yasugai drank, trusting in the ancient laws that bound the tribes. But the milk was laced with slow-acting poison, a coward's weapon. As he rode away, the sickness took him. His stomach burned with fire, and his vision blurred into grey shapes. He clung to his horse's mane, riding desperately for home, his strength draining away with every beat of his heart. The steppe offered no mercy to the poisoned wolf. The news arrived at the Olkhonut camp like a thunderclap, shattering Temujin's world into 1,000 pieces that could never be put back together. Yasuke was dead. Temujin was no longer a betrothed guest with a bright future. He was the son of a fallen chief, a potential threat to his enemies. He raced back to his father's camp, his heart pounding in rhythm with his horse's hooves, tears drying instantly in the cold air. But he found only chaos. The clan was restless, the elders whispering in huddles. His mother, Hoelun, stood with her children, her face a mask of grief and defiance. The structure of their lives had collapsed overnight. Temujin looked at the faces of the men who had followed his father, and in their eyes he saw not loyalty, but cold, calculating ambition waiting to strike. The power vacuum was filled quickly and ruthlessly. The Taichut clan, led by the ambitious Targutai, moved to seize control of the scattered families. They saw no reason to follow a 9-year-old boy or a widow. The deep water is gone, Targutai announced to the gathered men. The strong stone is broken. He declared himself the leader, dismissing Yasugei's family as heavy burdens to be cast aside. It was a coup, swift and bloodless, but brutal in its finality. Temujin watched as the men who had eaten at his father's table turned their backs on him. He learned then that loyalty on the steppe was as shifting as the wind, bending always to the strongest force, and that power respected only power. Holland would not accept their fate quietly. In a desperate act of defiance, shouldering the honor of her husband, she grabbed the spirit banner of Yasuge, the Duke, holding it high as she mounted her horse. She rode among the defecting families, shouting shames upon them, demanding they honor their oaths to the dead Khan. Her voice cracked with fury, and for a moment some of the families paused, shamed by the widow's courage. They turned back, drawn by the power of the ancestors. But it was fleeing. The fear of a shroud, watching her people abandon her to the cold and the silence. The morning of the abandonment was silent and grey. The clan packed their yurts, loaded their carts, and began to move, leaving only deep ruts in the grass. They left Hoyland's yurt standing as a mockery. They left Temujin and his brothers behind to die. As the long caravan snaked away into the distance, one old man, Charaka, tried to object to the cruelty. Targutai struck him down with a spear, leaving him to die in the grass. Temujin went to the old man, who whispered a final warning before passing into the next world. Then they were truly alone. No livestock, no protection. Just a woman and her children against the vast, empty steppe. The silence that followed was deafening, lighter only than the grave. Winter came early that year, and it was cruel beyond measure. The family had been left with nothing but the clothes on their backs. No sheep to slaughter, no milk to drink. The steppe became a prison of ice and wind. They moved constantly, seeking shelter in the folds of the mountains near the Burkhan Khaldun. Temujin, once the son of a chief, dug into the frozen earth with a sharpened stick, searching for wild onions and lily bulbs. His fingers cracked and bled in the cold. Every day was a battle against starvation. The wind was a constant companion, a howling beast that tried to tear through their thin clothes, whispering that it would be easier to just lie down and sleep in the snow and let the cold take them. It was Hoylan who kept them alive. She became a creature of the wild, driven by a fierce will to save her children from the darkness that sought to claim them. She ran along the river banks, gathering wild apples and bird cherries until her hands were raw and bleeding. She crafted hooks from needles to catch small fish in the frozen streams. She taught them that survival was not about strength, but adaptation. Temujin watched her, seeing the steel beneath her skin. She wasted nothing. She feared nothing. At night, she told them stories of their ancestors, feeding their spirits, even when their bellies were empty. She was the fire that kept the darkness at bay, refusing to let the flame of their lineage die out in the snow. Hunger changed them all. It hollowed out their cheeks and sharpened their eyes, turning them into wild things. It made them territorial, suspicious of even each other. The yurt was often silent, save for the sound of chewing on tough roots or the gnawing of bones. Temujin felt the hunger as a physical weight, a constant ache in his center that never faded. It stripped away his childhood day by day. He stopped playing. He stopped laughing. His eyes constantly scanned the ground for food, the horizon for threats. The boy was dying, and the survivor was taking his place, forged in the kiln of starvation, learning that the world owed him nothing but what he could take with his own two hands. The Onan River froze solid, a ribbon of white cutting through the brown landscape. It was their lifeline. Temujin spent hours on the ice, staring into the dark water through holes he chiseled with stone. He learned the patterns of the fish, the patience of the heron, waiting to strike. One day, while tracking a trail on the riverbank, he encountered another boy. It was Jamukha from the Jadaran clan, distant kin who were camping nearby. They eyed each other warily, two young wolves circling, but connection was rarer than food on the steppe, and curiosity won out. They began to play on the ice, sliding and laughing. A brief respite from the grim reality of survival in a world that wanted them dead. For a moment, they were just boys. They met often after that day. They played knuckle bones on the frozen river. The click of the bones, the only sound in the vast silence. Jamukha was quick-witted, charming, and bold. Temujin was quiet, intense, and steady. They balanced each other perfectly, like the bow and the string. In a world that had rejected Temujin, Jamukha offered acceptance and friendship. They raced their horses, or what passed for horses, and practiced with small bows, shooting at marmots on the hills. For a few hours each day, Temujin was not the outcast, the starving boy. He was just a child with a friend. It was a glimpse of the brotherhood he had been denied by his own kin, a light in the endless grey winter that warmed his spirit. On the banks of the river, beneath the endless sky, they swore a blood oath. They would be Anda, blood brothers. Jamukha gave Temujin a knucklebone of roe deer, and Temujin gave Jamukha a knucklebone of brass poured with lead. Later, as they grew, they exchanged greater gifts. Jamukha gave a golden sash, and Temujin gave a horse. They declared that they were one soul in two bodies. Separated, we are vulnerable, Jamukha said, but together we are iron. It was the most sacred vow of the steppe. Temujin believed it with all his heart, unaware that this love would one day turn into the fiercest rivalry the world would ever see, tearing the steppe apart and drowning it in blood. But inside his own family, shadows were growing. His half-brother, Bector, was the eldest male. He was big, strong, and increasingly bullying. As the family survived, Bector began to hoard food, using his strength to take what belonged to the others. He would snatch the fish Temujin caught, or the birds his brother Khazar shot. He sat at the head of the fire, eating, while the others watched with hollow eyes. He claimed the right of the firstborn in a family that had no inheritance but survival. Temujin watched him with cold eyes. It was not just about the food, it was about power. If Bector ruled them, they would remain slaves to his greed for forever. The tension in the yurt grew thick, sharper than the winter air, waiting for a spark. The breaking point came on a bright, cold morning. Temujin and Khazar had caught a lark and a small fish, a feast in their lean times. Bector took them both, laughing as he walked away, leaving them with nothing. Something snapped in Temujin. He looked at Khazar, and a silent understanding passed between them. They did not shout. They returned to the yurt, retrieved their bows, and stalked their brother. They found him on a small knoll, watching the horses. He saw them coming. Arrows knocked. "Do not kill the Hearthbreaker," Bector shouted, accepting his fate, but warning against destroying the family unity. Temujin released the string without hesitation. The arrow flew. It was the end of his childhood innocence and the first blood on his hands. Hulan was furious when they returned. She screamed at them, calling them murderers, destroyers of their own blood. She compared them to wolves, eating their own afterbirth. Temujin sat silently under her verbal lash, accepting the shame, but not regretting the act. With Bector gone, the dynamic shifted instantly. Temujin was now the undisputed head of the family. He bore the weight of their survival on his shoulders. He had killed his own blood to ensure the clan's future. It was a dark lesson, but a powerful one. Obstacles, even family, must be removed if they threatened survival. He was no longer just a boy. He was a leader, forged in blood and silence, willing to do what others could not. Years passed, and the family not only survived, they began to thrive on the fringes of the world. But the steppe has eyes. Targutai and the Taichut clan heard rumors of the outcast family's resilience. They heard that the wolf cub had not died in the snow, but had grown claws. Fear took root in Targutai's heart. He knew that a son of Yesugai, left alive, would eventually come for vengeance, for the betrayal and abandonment. One morning, the ground shook. The thunder of hundreds of hooves echoed off the mountains. Temujin woke instantly, his hand going to his knife. He knew that sound. It was the sound of his past coming to finish the job that the winter had failed to do. They scrambled up the slopes of Burkhan Khaldun, the sacred mountain. Most of the family hid in the dense forests and rocky crevices where horses could not follow. But the Taichud were hunting only one prize. "Deliver Temujin," they shouted to the mountain, "and the rest shall live." To save his family, Temujin separated from them. He spent 9 days hiding in the thickets without food, tormented by hunger and fear. He tried to leave 3 times, but each time a sign stops him. A loose saddle, a falling rock blocking the path. Finally, driven by starvation, he descended to surrender. He was spotted instantly. The net closed in around him, capturing the wolf at last. They did not kill him. Death was too easy, and Targutai wanted to display his dominance to the tribes. Instead, they humiliated him. They placed a heavy wooden gank around his neck, a large board that locked his hands and head, turning him into a helpless animal. It was a torture device meant to break the spirit. He could not feed himself. He could not brush away the flies that buzzed around his face. He was a prisoner in his own body. They paraded him through the camp, a warning to anyone who defied the Taijiud. Temujin bore the weight of the wood, his face impassive, his eyes burning with a cold, silent rage that promised retribution to every man who stared. Life became a blur of misery. He was dragged behind the clan as they moved, stumbling in the dust while the horses kicked up dirt in his face. The wooden collar chafed his neck until it was raw and bleeding. Children threw stones at him. Elders spat as he passed. He was the son of a Khan, treated lower than a slave. At night, he was tied up, left to sleep in the dirt, while the dogs roamed around him. He learned to retreat into his mind, to lock away his pain in a place where they could not touch it. He observed their camp, their guards, their weaknesses. He was a prisoner, but he was still a wolf, waiting for the cage to open, watching for the single mistake. The worst torture was the feasts. He was made to sit outside the circle of light, the smell of roasting mutton drifting over him, while his stomach cramped with hunger. He watched them eat, grease dripping down their chins, laughing and drinking. He remembered the meals at his father's table. He visualized the taste of the meat, chewing tightly on his own tongue to summon saliva. He did not beg. He did not cry out. He watched. He memorized the face of every man who laughed at him, adding their names to a list in his mind that he would one day promote from thought to action. His hunger became a fuel that kept him alive when all else failed. Yet, even in the heart of the enemy camp, he found a spark of humanity. One night, a guard named Sorkan Shira saw the boy struggling to drink from a puddle. The man looked around, ensuring no one was watching from the yurts, and held a ladle of water to Temujin's lips. He whispered words of pity, adjusting the heavy collar so the boy could sleep without choking. Later, Sorkin's sons would secretly bring him scraps of meat. It was a revelation for Temujin. Not all enemies were monsters. Loyalty could be found in succinct places. He marked Sorkan Shira's face too, not for death, but for reward. He never forgot a debt, whether it was owed in blood or in kindness. The time for the feast of the full moon arrived. The Taijiud celebrated late into the night, drinking copious amounts of fermented mare's milk. The guards grew sloppy, their vigilance drowned in alcohol. Temujin sensed the shift in the air. The camp grew quieter, the fires burning down to embers. His guard, a weak-willed boy, sat dozing nearby, the keys to the shackles dangling temptingly close. Temujin waited. His muscles were atrophied, his body weak, but his mind was sharp as a razor. He knew there would be no second chance. It was freedom or death. He gathered his strength for one final, desperate strike, summoning the last reserves of his will. The guard nodded off, his head lolling. Temujin moved. He did not try to pick the lock. He gathered every ounce of strength he possessed and swung the heavy wooden gang round like a club. It struck the guard's head with a sickening crack. The boy collapsed without a sound. Temujin didn't wait. He ran. The wooden collar was still around his neck, throwing him off balance, slamming into his shoulders with every step. He scrambled into the darkness, hearing the shout of alarm go up behind him. The camp erupted into chaos. The hunt was on, and he was the prey running for his life through the shadows of the yurts. He reached the Onon River. The moon was bright, too bright, exposing him to the world. There was nowhere to hide on the banks. The horsemen were approaching, their torches cutting through the night. In a desperate move, Temujin waded into the freezing water. He lay back, submerging his entire body, the heavy wooden collar floating on the surface, looking like driftwood. He tilted his head back, keeping only his nose and mouth above the water. The cold was a shock that nearly stopped his heart. He held his breath, becoming one with the river, as the hooves of his enemies thundered onto the bank, just feet away from his face, searching for blood. The searchers rode up and down the riverbank, their torches casting dancing reflections on the black water. He could hear their voices, angry and confused. He went this way. No, the tracks end here. One rider stopped right beside him. The light of the torch flickered over Temujin's face, hidden amidst the river debris. He stared up through the water, seeing the distorted shape of the horse, the metal of the stirrup. He did not blink. He willed his heart to stop beating so loud. Sorkan Shira was among the riders. He saw the boy in the water. He paused, then shouted, "He is not here. Let us ride downstream." Saving the boy's life with a lie, the riders moved on, their noise fading into the distance. Temujin dragged himself from the river, shivering violently, his body numb. Sorkan Shira returned later, alone. He did not capture the boy. Instead, he brought a smith to break the wooden collar. The heavy wood fell away, and Temujin gasped, rubbing his raw neck. He was free. Sorkan gave him a horse and a bow, telling him to go and never return. Temujin rode into the night, the wind drying his wet clothes. He had escaped the jaws of death. He returned to Hoelen and his brothers, a ghost risen from the grave, stronger than before, carrying the memory of the river in his bones. Reunited with his family, Temujin looked out from their mountain hideout. He was no longer the frightened child clutching a blood clot. He was a survivor of starvation, a killer of his brother, a prisoner who had broken his chains. He looked at the vast steppe that had tried to kill him so many times. He did not hate it. He understood it. It respected only strength. He vowed then that he would not just survive in this world. He would master it. He would unite the scattered tribes. He would make them all fear the outcast of the steppe. The boy was gone. Genghis Khan was beginning to wake, and the world would tremble at his name for 1,000 years.